So welcome everyone to this very special evening with Bhante Tejadhammo, and thank you so much, Bhante, for being here with us today. It is such a pleasure to have you here and to have this evening of Dharma with you. So just a little bit about Venerable for those who don't know him, which I'll be very surprised about. So Venerable Tejadhammo, he's the spiritual director of the Association of Engaged Buddhists. And Bhante, he gives teachings and works for people who are seriously ill in various hospitals, hospices and their homes in and around Sydney, teaching healing, meditation, providing spiritual support, and also assisting people during the end of the stages of their life. So Venerable, he's very, very engaged in the community and hence the Association of Engaged Buddhists. He's a very good teacher and also a good support for the Buddhist community and has been around in the Buddhist community in Australia for many, many years. So it is with such pleasure for me to formally invite Venerable here today and also to invite him for meditation guidance, a talk and also a discussion at the end. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to pop it into the chat and I'll be able to facilitate the Q&A at the end. So don't be shy, make the most of this opportunity. So Venerable, over to you.
Okay, very good, Tina, thank you. So we might start with a little bit of chanting first and then do some meditation practice, if that's all right. So people can feel free to join in if they'd like to. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Saṅghāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Bhutaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Saṅghāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Bhutaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Saṅghāṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. So I'm presuming that most people have a meditation practice of one sort or another. And so I suggest that we start off, or that you start off in whatever is the usual way for yourself. And I'll try to provide a little bit of guidance as we go along. So first of all, just take a few minutes to let yourself settle. Excuse me, to let yourself settle wherever you're sitting, whether you're on a chair, on the floor, or a cushion, just resting, allowing the body to become settled, to become quieter, allowing the heart and mind to become more settled, become more centered and quieter. And not trying to concentrate, but just trying to be present. To be present in each moment. And if it helps you, you can use simple awareness of the breath to help you touch into each moment. So simply being aware of the body, being aware of the breath, resting into the body, resting into the breath. And allowing everything else to arise, to come into being and to pass away. So in this moment, just this body is enough. In this moment, just this breath is enough. Letting everything else fall away. Allowing whatever thoughts and feelings might be arising within the body, heart, and mind, allow them to arise, allow them to come into being and to pass away again. Not trying to stop them, not trying to hold on to them, not trying to suppress them. Just gently coming back to the body and to the breath. So you allow each breath to help you to become more centered, more peaceful, more settled. Allowing the body to let go of any tightness or tiredness or tension. In this moment, just this body, just this breath. So just allowing yourself to relax into the breath. And feel the spaciousness and openness of each breath. Just this body, just this breath. Whatever sensations are coming and going, just allow them to arise, to come into being, to pass away, to dissolve again. And just allowing yourself to rest into the body and rest into the breath. And whatever might be arising within the heart and the mind, you can allow those things or that thing to arise, to come into being and to pass away again. You don't need to make judgments about those things. You don't need to try to stop them or suppress them. You just allow them to arise and allow them to dissolve again. And all the time letting yourself rest more deeply into the body and into the breath. And as you surrender the thoughts and the feelings, the emotions that perhaps are arising, let yourself just enjoy that interior silence from moment to moment. Recalling the Buddha's description of the heart and mind as vast, expansive, open, and spacious. So let yourself enter into that spaciousness, that openness. Just this body, just this breath. Without concentrating, just allowing yourself to become more and more deeply aware of the body and the breath. Allowing that awareness to produce greater and greater ease and calm and peacefulness and centeredness. In this moment, I need not grasp at anything. I need not try to stop anything. I need not try to change anything. In this moment, just this body, just this breath. And now very simply and very gently, try to stir up some gratitude, some katanu within your own heart and mind toward this poor body. This body which you very often perhaps neglect or ignore or take for granted. Try to generate a little gratitude toward the body. Call to mind the gift of your body given by your parents. And call them to mind with gratitude. Without them, there would be no body. Call to mind with gratitude the way they nurtured your body, the gift of the body they gave to you. And generate some gratitude toward yourself. And make a little promise that you will try in future to take greater care of your body, so that you might be of greater benefit to yourself and to all other suffering beings. Allowing your breath now to lead you out of your practice, coming back to simple awareness of the space that you're sitting in, the air that's all around you, the presence of your own body sitting in that space. And generating that little aspiration, that wish that all beings might be well and happy. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May I and all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May we be well. May we be happy. May the sun of wisdom and the moon of compassion arise and illuminate our bodies, hearts, and minds. And may we come quickly to the complete freedom of heart and mind, which is Nibbana. And just very simply and very gently, letting your eyes open, letting yourself rest and relax. So I thought I might talk to you a little bit tonight about the path that the Buddha puts before us and in a way challenges us to walk. But I'm going to put it in slightly different terms. We often think about two things in the Buddhist tradition. We think about faith and we think about doubt. We think about saddha, or faith, or confidence, or trust, and vicikicca, or doubt, or skeptical doubt, as it's sometimes called. And what I'd like to suggest to you is that if we're following the path of the Buddha, then initially at least, we are actually walking between those two states, between those two conditions of heart and mind. We can't just grab hold of one and throw away the other. The two of them, in a way, are like opposite sides of a coin. And when we start out our practice, we need both. We need faith or confidence or trust, but it should also be tempered by doubt. Faith without doubt in the early stages of our spiritual life is a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for telling other people what they should or should not believe, what they should or should not do. If we have doubt without faith, then we may as well tie our feet together and throw ourselves into the ocean, because we can't do anything. We're locked in to a position which is, in the end, completely futile and leads nowhere. So we need the two things working together, and we need to walk, so to speak, between the two. It's a kind of liminal state between faith and doubt in the early stages of our spiritual life. It's very easy and very dangerous to develop an unconditioned faith in a teacher, for example. Because teachers, as far as I'm aware, are human beings. And human beings have all sorts of faults, flaws, and failings. And if we want to overlook the humanness of a teacher and put the teacher on some kind of pedestal, or in Thailand, put the teacher in a busabok and in a way elevate and worship the teacher, then the next stage after that is we tear the teacher down because we become disenchanted with the teacher. And Buddhism as a religion is full of examples of just this kind of thing. Sometimes, very, very famous teachers turn out to have what are called feet of clay. And people become then very disappointed and disillusioned, and some people give up the practice of the Dharma altogether. Some people become cynical and hard and harsh towards the Dhamma or towards their fellow Dhamma practitioners. So we have to be very, very careful. It's very easy to be, if you like, carried away by a teacher who may appear to be very charismatic. Remember that at the end of his life, the Buddha said, when the monks asked him to appoint a leader, and the Buddha said, no, I'm not appointing a leader. You have the Dhamma as your teacher. Yeah. So it's the Dhamma that's the most important thing. Yeah. And in order to approach the Dhamma, we need both faith and doubt. We need to have a certain amount of doubt about ourselves. Many, many years ago, I met in Thailand a very famous Buddhist teacher, a layman. Some of you might have heard of him or read some of his books. He's a very fine human being, a very fine teacher, a man called John Blefeld. And I asked John Blefeld, what should I look for when I'm looking for a teacher? This was before I met the monk who became my teacher. And John Blefeld, who'd had many, many, many years living in China before the takeover by the communists, and had lived as a monk in China, and then was married to a very lovely Chinese lady. And they fled to Hong Kong when the communists took over in China, and then they finished up living in Bangkok, and he worked for the UN. And he used to do a little bit of teaching from his home. And so I said to John Blefeld, what should I look for in a teacher? And his answer at the time I found very, very strange. He said to me, you have to find a teacher who has a sense of humor about you and about himself. And I thought, what a strange answer to give. A teacher who has a sense of humor about you, I could kind of understand that, and about himself. And when I was first living in Thailand, I met many, many teachers, some very famous ones, who had no sense of humor at all about themselves or about me or any of the other students. They took themselves terribly seriously. And then I met the monk who became my teacher. And suddenly, the words of John Blefeld became crystal clear, because here was a teacher who had a wonderful sense of humor about me. He was not going to let me escape into one of my usual wormholes that I could run away into. And he could point out how foolish and silly and stupid I was without the slightest bit of cruelty or malice. And at the same time, he had a wonderful sense of humor about himself, and very often would laugh. In fact, once I remember I was going up to Bangkok to start some Pali studies, and he said to me, he was a very old man and a little bit shaky, and he said to me, "Oh, Tejadhammo, you come to my kuti, I'm going to shave your head before you go to Bangkok." And he had hands that were like this all the time with a cutthroat razor. And I thought, oh, no, you're not going to shave my head. But he insisted. And so I went and we sat outside, and he put soap and all the rest of it and the cutthroat razor. And then he said to me, there you are, it's finished. And I said, oh, okay, thank you, Tan. And he held up a mirror, and he'd shaved everything except a strip down the middle, like a mohawk. And I said, I think you've forgotten something. And he said, no, that's so that when you get to Bangkok, they won't think you're a country bumpkin. So he had a wonderful sense of humor. But he also was a person who could inspire you. And that's another aspect of faith or sadha that I think is very, very important. The ability of a teacher, or indeed the Dhamma itself, to inspire us, to make an effort, to move forward, to keep making an effort. So, if you're looking for a teacher, the best advice I can give you is to look for a teacher who has a sense of humor about themselves and about you to begin with. And then a teacher who can actually inspire you. That is, who really encourages you to move forward, who doesn't want to put you into a sort of a glass box. If you want to be a Buddhist, this is how you need to be. You have to be like this. Because that's not the way that the Buddha taught. Some of you, pardon me moving around, I've got a bit of a bung hip at the moment. You might remember the Maharahula Awuda Sutta and the shorter Sutta to Rahula, where the Buddha says, don't think that just by copying me that you'll get anywhere. It's not by copying the Buddha, it's by becoming an authentic Buddha oneself, so to speak. Not by copying something else. I told some of you before, there was a wonderful old Thai monk who lived in Adelaide for a long time and went back to Thailand. He died when he was 104, Achan Bunyarit. And once I was staying with him in Adelaide in the funny little temple that he lived in Theberton, and a group of schoolgirls from the local Catholic school came with one of the sisters from the school, and we had lunch. And then I said to him, "Oh, Tanchaokhun, I'll go now." And he said, "No, you won't. You stay right where you are." So I sat next to him, and the girls came, and he gave a little talk. And then the sister said, "Oh, Lungpo, could you explain to the girls about the Buddha image? Because being a Thai temple, It had a huge golden Buddha image, and all the usual decorations and so on. And I remember thinking at the time, wrong question, sister, because I know what he's like. And he put his hand up towards the top of the Buddha and he said, "Oh, girls." And as he said, "Oh, girls," he brought his hand down, right down along the body of the Buddha. He said, "So beautiful and completely useless." And the girls all laughed, and the good sister didn't laugh at all. She was a bit taken aback. And he then went on to give a talk about how the Buddha image is just that. It's an image. It's meant to help us to reflect upon the qualities of the Buddha, just as the Buddha himself teaches us that we should reflect on the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, but not to find them outside, but to find them within ourselves. When most of you, I'm sure, know the chant Iti Piso Bhagava, and that chant has exactly that description or that direction in it, to reflect upon or to mirror, because it's called the mirror of Dhamma, to mirror oneself in the Buddha, in the Dhamma, and in the Sangha. So it's very important to be very, very realistic when we approach the question of taking up a practice involving the Dhamma, taking up a practice with a teacher, and not allowing ourselves to be swept away by initial appearances, if you like, because that can be a dangerous thing. And also not to give away your autonomy. The Buddha is very, very strong on maintaining your autonomy, not in a stubborn way, not in an ignorant way, but it's your responsibility, not somebody else's. So it's up to you to find your path. Now, of course, we know that in the suttas, the Buddha talks about the path that leads only in one direction and so on. But how you walk that path is your responsibility, not somebody else's. And no one else can walk the path for you. You've got to do it yourself. And the Buddha's constantly reminding his disciples, both the monks and the nuns and the laymen and the laywomen, of the fact that they've got to do the walking. The Buddha can't do it for you. You've got to do it. So you need to find for yourself that balance between faith and between doubt. So let's look a little bit at faith a little bit more, and then have a look at doubt. Because in faith, in the Western tradition, a lot of people identify faith with blind belief. And the fact is that they're not the same thing. Faith is not the same as blind belief. Blind belief is not really very useful unless you're trying to hide from something. But faith is something that we actually all have a lot of the time, but we're actually unaware of. We have faith and we have trust, and you exercise those two qualities every single day. When you get on a bus, something as simple as getting on a bus, you trust that the bus driver has a license and knows how to drive. If he doesn't, you'll be disappointed. But you have trust, a very simple, basic kind of trust, a very simple and basic kind of faith that, okay, this bus is going to take me to wherever it's going to. We have faith and trust at a very simple level, and sometimes a very deep level, in each other. And we all know the pain of finding out that faith or that trust has been misplaced or has been abused. And the very fact that that's a very painful experience shows us how important faith and trust is, confidence. So when we apply this to the Dhamma, then for the Buddha, what we need to do is we need to be constantly testing the Dhamma. not just taking, the Dhamma like you go and get a Big Mac meal, where you just drive up in your car and say, I'll have a whatever it is, and you get the whole lot all at once. No, when it comes to the Dhamma, you have to test and test and test, but not in a cruel or nasty way, and not in a proud way either. But testing with a genuine and heartfelt concern for yourself and for others. Maybe this path is actually going to help me to become free, to have a completely free heart and mind. So we need that kind of faith, we need that kind of confidence. And in order to have it, we need to have a certain level of bravery. So I don't know whether you've had this experience, but I've had the experience sometimes where people come on a retreat, and sometimes even before the retreat gets started, they're leaving. They say, I remember one lady who said to me, "Oh, Bhante, I'll have to go home because I left the iron on." And it was so clear, it had nothing to do with leaving an iron on. It was just that she was scared of what might happen. So in order to have faith, in order to practice the Dhamma well, we need a certain amount of bravery or courage, or even fierceness in the way that we approach it. And that gives rise to the idea of discipline, a certain amount of discipline in our practice. But that has to be very, very finely balanced, that discipline. Some of you will know that there's there's a number of suttas, but there's a sutta called the Attadaṇḍasutta, in which the Buddha talks about the danda was a kind of club at the time of the Buddha, and was often held by one of the Hindu gods in the images. And the idea was this was the club that you got beaten over the head with if you didn't do what was expected of you. It was the club of duty. And the Buddha was very against this idea of duty, right? Because it's not something that comes from within, it's something that's imposed from without. So in this little sutta, which I'll read for you now, or I'll read the introductory part and then read the Attadaṇḍasutta. In this little sutta, which many of you will know, I'm sure, the Oghataraṇasutta, a Devata appears to the Buddha in the early hours of the morning or very late at night, and asks the Buddha, how did you cross over the flood? The flood, of course, is a primary image or metaphor that the Buddha uses all the time and carries quite a range of meanings. Can be samsara, can be the flood of the asavas and so on. So in this little sutta, it says, I have heard on that occasion that the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. Then a certain Devata in the far extreme of the night, her extreme radiance lighting up the entirety of Jeta's Grove, went to the Blessed One. On arrival, having bowed down to him, she stood to one side. As she was standing there, she said to him, tell me, dear sir, how you crossed over the flood. So this Devata recognizes that the Buddha is liberated, is completely free. He's crossed the flood of being, if you like. And the Buddha gives a very interesting answer. And this touches on what I was talking to you about tonight, about this question of walking between faith and doubt. He says, I crossed over the flood without pushing forward and without staying in place. So he gives this very paradoxical answer. He says, I crossed the flood without pushing forward. And if so, we say, oh, you didn't push forward, we just stayed where you were. And he says, but without staying in place. Now, the Buddha uses this kind of paradox very, very often. The Buddha loves to, so to speak, pull the rug out from under us. to give us a situation or a position, and then say, okay, deal with this. Another one that comes immediately to mind is where he says, don't think of yourself as superior to others. And of course, most people who call themselves Buddhists would nod and say, oh, of course, I would never think of myself as superior to others. And then the Buddha says, don't think of yourself as inferior to others. And people think, oh, well, okay, well, fair enough. Yeah, okay, yeah. So don't be superior, don't be inferior. And then he drops the bomb. He says, don't think of yourself as equal to others. So he gives us, in a sense, he gives us nowhere to go. Where are we going to go with this? And again, it's like walking that tightrope between faith and doubt. We'd like to hang on to faith and eliminate doubt, but you can't do it, at least not in the early stages. And when I'm talking about early stages, I'm not talking about a few weeks after you've started Dharma study and practice. I'm now 70 years old, and I've been practicing for a long time, but I'm still at the beginning. So don't think it's got anything to do with chronological time. It's all to do with what's going on here within the chitta, within the heart and the mind. So the Buddha says that's how I crossed over, by not going forward, not pushing forward, which is something that we often do when it comes to Dhamma practice. I want this, I want this, I want this. You go on a retreat with people, and after the retreat, people say, oh, what experiences did you have? Did you get this jhana? Did you get that jhana? That's all about pushing forward. It's all about competition. It's got nothing to do with practice. It's got nothing to do with Dhamma. It's to do with being a greedy human being. So the Buddha says, no, not pushing forward, not using force, and also without standing still, without staying in place. Now, the standing still, we could say, is a little bit like giving up, surrendering and sort of saying, well, yeah, okay, I can't do anything. And the Buddha says, I don't do either of those things. So he has this strange position, which is not a position, which can only be found by attempting to enter into practice. Again, it's very like when the Buddha meets the man walking down the road, and the man says to him, the man's so taken by the Buddha's appearance, he says to him, oh, excuse me, sir, are you a Dewa? And the Buddha says, no. Oh, are you this? Are you that? Are you something else? And then the Buddha says no to each of them. And then finally he says to him, Manu Sosi, are you a man? Are you a human being? And the Buddha says, no. In other words, the Buddha has gone beyond those kinds of categories. So they're no longer applicable to the Buddha. So he can't be, in a sense, he can't be locked into one position or another. And that's, then he says to the person says to him, well, who are you? And the Buddha says, I am Tathagata. I am Tathagata. I'm the one, literally it means I'm the one who's not here. Right? So again, it's one of those ones where the Buddha says, here's a position, you try and take it. And I'll pull the rug out from under you and then see where you are. It's very interesting because if you think about it, Dharma comes from the root D, which means the ground, the ground where you can stand. And so the Buddha's challenge is, I'll pull your usual ground out from under you. And then what are you going to do? Where are you going to stand? What are you going to stand on? So the Buddha says, the Devata says, but how did you do this? How did you cross the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place? And the Buddha says, when I pushed forward, I was whirled about. When I stayed in place, I sank. Now, if you think about it, when we try to use force in our Dhamma practice, we are certainly whirled about. And we cannot be sure, we cannot be clear about our motivation, about our intention, or indeed what direction we're going in. Because it's being driven by grasping, by greed. And of course, behind that, by a very strong sense of self. I want this. Yeah. I've said to some of you before, the funny thing is that very often people say, oh, I want to be enlightened, I want to be enlightened. But they also want to be there exactly as they are now to see themselves become enlightened. Yeah. So they're not prepared to actually surrender anything. My old friend who passed away 12 years ago now, Venerable Rinpoche in Melbourne, he used to say to me, oh, he was Tibetan teacher, wonderful, wonderful teacher. And he said, oh, Tejadhammo, you Western people are very strange. I said, oh, really, Rinpoche? He said, why is that? He said, I have people come to the centre, here, the wonderful centre in Carlton. He said, and they'd talk and talk and talk to me. And he said, they'd give me all these problems, and then they'd say, Rinpoche, what can I do? How can I resolve these problems? And he said, and I'd ask them, how long have you had these problems? And the example he gave me was this person said, oh, about 18 years. He said, oh, okay, it'll take you 18 years to resolve them then, And he said, and people would get very annoyed because they wanted the teacher to say, there it is, there's the solution, just do this. Just put the coin in the slot and it'll all be fine. So again, that's a kind of, pardon me, that's a kind of false faith. So the Buddha says, okay, if I pushed forward, I was whirled about, and that's what happens to us. If I stayed in place, I just sank. It's kind of sink into a kind of despair because you feel as though you're not getting anywhere. And then the Devata says to the Buddha, at long last, I see a Brahman who is totally free, who without pushing forward or without staying in place has crossed over the entanglements of the world. And then the Devata, as they always do, disappears in a flash of light. So wonderful, wonderful little sutta in which the Buddha talks about the incredibly skillful way that we should approach Dhamma, not pushing forward, not staying still. And we have to find for ourselves what that means for each of us individually. It's not like you can apply a rule for that. We have guidelines, of course, given to us by the Buddha, but you can't hand a rule out to everybody. So I mentioned the Attadaṇḍasutta, and I'll just read a little bit because it's quite long. And the Buddha calls the danda the rod of violence, because it was used as a symbol of authority. So if I've got, remember the old-fashioned police truncheon? That's exactly what it was like, or like a shrunken down baseball bat. The Buddha gives this teaching. He says, when it's embraced, the rod of violence breeds danger and fear. Look at people in strife. I will tell how I experienced terror. Seeing people floundering like fish in small puddles, competing with one another. And as I saw this, fear came into me. The world was entirely without substance. All the directions were knocked out of line. Wanting a haven for myself, I saw nothing that wasn't laid claim to. Seeing nothing in the end but competition, I felt discontent. So here the Buddha, I think, gives a perfect description of our own experience. When we look around, when we look at our experience, which is why we take up the practice of Dhamma in the first place, we may not have perfect motivation, but that's certainly part of it. We are distressed by what we see, and we experience danger, we experience fear about all sorts of things, not the least of which, of course, is death. And we look around and we see other people floundering around, as the Buddha says here, like fish in small puddles. As the water dries up, the fish flounder more and more and more, and then, of course, they're going to die. And then this beautiful description, the world was entirely without substance. What a wonderful way of describing the world. The world, of course, when the Buddha is using it here, is the world of oneself. This loka, yeah? This world is without substance. Yeah? All the directions were knocked out of line. So when we have this recognition that there is, first of all, this problem, this dukkha, everything gets knocked out of line. And we find ourselves spinning around. We're not sure what to do. And then the Buddha goes on and says, and then I saw an arrow here, an arrow so very hard to see, embedded in the heart. Another favorite image, another favorite metaphor of the Buddha, this idea of the arrow in the heart. And he goes on and says, overcome by this arrow, you run about in all directions. But simply on pulling it out, you don't run. So if you can remove this arrow in the heart, yeah, then you don't run. And he says you don't sink. So here he's linking this teaching up with the one I just gave you before. Whatever things are tied down in the world, you should not be set on them. So things that are locked in the world or tied into the world, you shouldn't be set on them. Having totally penetrated pleasures, sensual passion, you should train for your own unbinding, letting go. And then he gives a few things like be truthful, not insolent, not deceptive, and so on. So in order to do this, we need, first of all, to start off by having a kind of an openness, a looseness in the way that we approach our Dhamma practice and the way in which we approach the Dhamma itself. Instead of deciding that we know, yeah, we need to allow the Dhamma to speak to us, not us to speak to the Dhamma. And so we need a certain amount of doubt about ourselves. You know, I remember something that happened to me when I was very, very recently ordained, and I was doing a lot of meditation practice, and I was doing a lot of walking practice, and I was fierce in the way I approached practice. And so I was walking up and down in the sun. You know, of course, you want to walk in the sun because it's unpleasant, it's uncomfortable, and that's got to be good, you know, when you're a serious Dhamma practitioner. And I'm walking up and down, and I'm thinking to myself, you're going so well, you know, you're doing really, really well. You know? And then suddenly, in the midst of this walking up and down with this great fury, I thought to myself, why am I doing this? And the thought arose in the mind, oh, I want to be holy. I want to be holy. And then immediately the thought arose, this is complete bull. This idea of holiness is just another mask that you want to put on. So you have to dump the idea of holiness, you know? And you have to instead try for authenticity, try to be, we say in Australia, fair dinkum about things. And so it took me quite a few days to recover from that experience because I was so shocked by my own capacity to lie to myself about why I was doing it. So we need a certain amount of doubt about our own motivation, our own intention, but it has to be coupled with faith, genuine faith, heartfelt faith, and trust and confidence in the Buddha, in the Buddha's teaching, in the Dhamma. If we can find good friends, like you've got good friends at the Metta Centre, good Sangha friends, Kalyana Mit, then that's really great. But you can't always have that. You know? the Buddha points out that, we can have someone who's our best friend one day, and the very next day that person can be our worst enemy, and vice versa. We can have someone that we think of as our enemy who the very next day, when things change, can become our friend. So we can't always rely on the Sangha in that sense. So we place our trust in the Dhamma, and we place our trust in the experience of the Buddha and the transmission of that experience to us. So we need to balance this faith and doubt together, and we hope that our faith will strengthen and will become stronger and stronger, and our faith will then be proved by our own experience. My teacher used to say to me quite often, when he got me to go and do some teaching there was a very fancy hotel. We were living in Phuket at the time. It was a very fancy hotel called the Meridian Hotel. And he got me to go and do some teaching there. And so I was preparing all this teaching, and he said to me, "Oh, so what are you going to do?" And I told him, and he said, "Look, you can't really teach people what you know." And I thought, that's a strange thing to say. He said, "You can only show people what you are knowing." In Thai, with the use of the continuous tense, it's much stronger than in English. You can only show people what you're knowing. So forget about telling people what you know, like some sort of clever person, "Oh, I know this, I know that, I know something else." No, his point was you show them what you are knowing. That is what's arising within your own heart and mind from moment to moment to moment. So we need to find, if we're lucky, we need to find a good teacher. We need to develop trust, cultivate trust in the teacher and confidence in the teacher. But at the same time, we need to accept it's my responsibility. It's my path, which doesn't mean that I own the path. It just means it's the path that I'm walking. And so I'm responsible for how I walk on that path, for what I bring to the path. And that image of the path is so central to the teaching of the Buddha. There's that wonderful sutta where the Buddha's traveling with his attendant, and they come to a fork in the road, and the attendant says, "We go this way." And the Buddha says, "Well, no, I think we go this way." And the attendant says, "No, we should go this way." And the Buddha says, "Well, no, I think we should go this way." And the attendant is carrying the Buddha's bowl and outer robe. And so he slams it down on the ground and says, "I'm going this way." So the Buddha just keeps walking. And the attendant goes down the other road. And about an hour later, the Buddha hears running behind him, and he turns around, and here's the monk all beaten up and his robe's torn and everything. And he says, "Oh, I met a whole bunch of bandits on that road down there." And the Buddha doesn't say, "I told you so." The Buddha says, "Well, come on, let's keep going. Let's keep walking." So if we can, we find a teacher that we can trust, that we can have confidence in, but that we still keep responsibility for ourselves. And remember that it's our path that we're walking, even though we're all walking in a very real sense, we're all walking the same path, all going in the same direction, but each of us walks in our own way. It's terribly, terribly important. And also to recognize too, when we're actually, well, let's call a spade, when we're lying to ourselves about where we are on the path. It's very easy to do. I had someone who used to come and see me regularly to talk about their practice, and they came to me. This person had a lot of problems, lots and lots of problems, psychological problems, but they had such an overinflated sense of their own, where they were on the spiritual path. And they said to me, the last time I saw them, they said to me something about their meditation practice, and I made some suggestions, and they said, "Oh, no, you don't get it, Bhante. I'm just that far from enlightenment. And I said, well, you're very lucky if you're that far from enlightenment. Yeah. I never saw them again. But I know from other people that they drifted back to drunkenness and all sorts of things. It was terribly sad. I know with my own teacher, when I was staying with him and we were practicing together, and every day he used to get me to come to his kuti in the evening and tell him about my meditation practice for that day. And he would sit and listen, and then he'd ask me, he'd say, oh, okay, so tell me again what happened, and I'd have to tell him again, and he might ask 3-4 times, and I'd repeat myself, and then he might say, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then one day I had the idea that I'd like to go to a different monastery, and so I went to him and I said, I'd like to go to this other monastery. I've heard it's very good for teaching meditation and so on. And his answer was, no, you're not going anywhere. And I thought, oh, okay. So I went back to my kuti and I thought, okay, I'll wait a little bit and I'll go and ask him again. So I waited for a week and I went back and I said to him, I'd really like to go to this particular monastery. I've heard that, they do very good meditation teaching and so on. And he said, no, you're not going anywhere, right? You stay right where you are. So the next week, he had a relative, a niece, who was a nun at a particular meditation center, which was not far from the meditation center I wanted to go to. And I knew that he had a parcel of things that he wanted to send to his niece. So I went to him. This shows the level of self-deception that you can engage in. I went to him and I said, oh, Tanchaokhun, you want to send those things to Meiji Amon. And he said, now, if I went to that monastery, I could take them for you. And he looked at me like he was thinking, you poor fool. And he said to me, so tell me, why do you want to go to this monastery? And I said, because I want to deepen and develop and improve my practice. And he smiled and he said, that's very good. Come here tonight at 9 o'clock. So I went back to my kuti and I thought, oh, okay, because he organized transport and so on. I thought it's a strange time to go to the other monastery, but anyway. So at 9 o'clock, I went to his kuti and he was there and he had a great big bunch of keys with him. And I thought, this is a bit strange. So he then took me by the wrist and we went across the courtyard in the darkness and he unlocked the iron gates around the ordination chapel. We went in and he locked those gates and we went to the door, the big wooden door, and he unlocked that and we stepped over the threshold into the pitch black dark and he locked the door behind. And then he disappeared in the darkness and suddenly a match was struck up at the front and a candle was lit in front of the Buddha image. And he came back and he said, now we pay our respects to the Buddha. And I said, okay. So we knelt down, we paid our respects to the Buddha, and then he just sat down next to me and never said another word. And I sat next to him and he was clearly meditating. And I sat next to him and we sat there for a bit more than an hour. And I was in agony because we were sitting on the concrete floor. And he just sat there. He was as calm and as steady as a rock. And then after a while, he said, I kept leaning over to see if I could see him because there wasn't much light in the place. And after an hour or a bit more than an hour, he said, very good, very good. We pay our respects to the Buddha. And he got up and went to the front and blew the candle out. And in the dark, he opened the door and we went out and he locked the door and he went out, opened the gate, locked the gate. And we walked across the courtyard. And I thought to myself, well, thank goodness that's over. I can't wait to go to bed now. And he said to me, good, very good. Tomorrow night, 9 o'clock. So we did that every night, night after night after night. And each night, the time spent in practice got longer and longer and longer. And he never said a word. And I spent a lot of time trying to see if I could see spiders up on the ceiling, looking at the bats in the candlelight, until finally the mind, which was like a raging river, or torrent finally began to settle down. And finally, I could sort of sit quietly and enter my practice properly and see. I've always thought of it as being finally able to see the bed of the river of the mind. And that was some weeks later. And when we came out, it was very early hours of the morning. And he said to me, well, we'll go on alms round now. I said, okay, that's very good. And that was it. There was no more going there at 9 o'clock at night. And there was no desire to go anywhere else. And all of that was done with complete silence, just by showing what to do. And by having the great generosity, the great loving kindness to actually sit with someone. You just imagine, he was the abbot of the monastery, and he was quite a busy man, and yet he found the time and the loving kindness to do that for this poor silly phalang. So we need to look for a teacher. We need to cultivate and develop trust and confidence in a teacher, but we need always to balance the question of faith and doubt together. And until our faith becomes really strong, and it becomes, if you like, part of our lived experience. So we no longer need to say, I believe something. We know something. As the Buddha said in the Attadaṇḍasutta, the Buddha says things arose within the mind that had never arisen before. So I hope that helps a bit. There's a lot more that we could say about both of these topics, about faith and doubt. But I think that's probably enough for now. So if you'd like to discuss things amongst yourselves, I'm not sure that I can answer too many questions, but anyway, I'll hand you back to Tina.
Thank you so much, Bhante. Such an inspiring and deep teaching, but importantly, thanks for pulling the ground from under us.
Well,
with such humor and grace as usual.
Well, we can't. We're human beings. We can't help it, can we? It's what we do. We try to keep building things under ourselves to prop ourselves up, even though we know there's nothing actually under there supporting us. And I guess we have to finally be able to let go and to have that trust and confidence that we can let go. But it's never ending. I think really, it just you think, oh, okay, now I've got it, and then you think, well, no, I haven't really quite got it. There's a little bit further to go, and also it's very important to remember that you're not on your own in this. That there's a whole lot of other people who just like you are human beings who also experience suffering and happiness and so on, and who are also on the path. So yeah. Anyway, so carry on, Tina. Whatever you had to do.
That's so true. And on that point, Bhante, I feel like as we keep practicing, we realize how much we don't know. And more that we don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, remember there was a very good Korean Zen monk who came to Australia many years ago now, and he wrote quite a famous book at the time called "Only Don't Know." Some of you might have read the book, and that was his thing. He was sort of saying, okay, when you practice, only don't know. Don't keep telling yourself, I know this, I know that, I know something else. Because we do it all the time, and monks and nuns do it too. Don't fool yourself that they don't do it, because they do. It's human beings. We think, oh, now, excuse me, we think, oh, now I've got this, so I hang on to that. And that's why, one of the great teachers, I think, of our time was Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, because he had this wonderful way of just releasing things, of sort of letting things be, showing you, how things are and how you don't have to actually do a lot. It's a question of in a way, it's a question of being rather than doing. And I still remember, because I did a few retreats with him in Plum Village, and I remember I spent a whole day with him once at his, because he doesn't live at Plum, well, he's not there now, of course, but he wasn't living at Plum Village. He lived in a little farmhouse about 18 or 20 kilometres away, because, as he said, if he lived at Plum Village, he'd be driven mad by people. So he lived in the farmhouse, and he came in 2 or 3 times a week to give teaching. And I had the privilege and honour of spending a day with him at the farmhouse. And he only said one thing the whole day that I was there with him. And that was, after we had lunch, we walked outside, and he said to me, "What a beautiful day." And that's all that needed to be said, because what more could you say? Anything more would have been superfluous. So his style of teaching, I think, is very relevant for us, because we tend, especially I think in the West, we tend to be like hermit crabs. We tend to sort of just keep gathering stuff, and, you know, constructing more and more sort of Dharma barnacles on ourselves, you know. And yet the teaching of the Buddha is all about loosening those, letting them go. Anyway, I'll stop talking. So.
No, please do. I mean, it's very relevant. Thank you, Bhante. So I'm just going to invite those who are here in person, as well as those online. If you have any questions, feel free to ask the questions directly. You can unmute yourself, or you can also pop it into the chat or write it onto the pieces of paper, and I can help ask Bhante those questions for you. Bhante, just to start it off, you were talking earlier about skeptical doubt. Now, of course, doubt is also one of the hindrances, one of the 5 hindrances.
Yeah.
So at what point does skeptical doubt become less of something that is useful and more of a hindrance for our practice?
Well, I think if you think of it in a very simple way, when skeptical doubt locks us into position and we just sink, you know, as in that sutta. So we lose, if you like, that connection with the Buddha or with the Dhamma, and we can't sort of make a decision, you know, like it's, maybe this, maybe that, maybe something else, you know. People do it with teachers, you know, 1 minute they're with this teacher, then they're with someone else, you know, oh, this teacher's wonderful, and then, you know, a month later they're with a different teacher. People do it with approaches to meditation practice, so that they never actually develop a practice. It's always, oh, now I'm doing this, or now I'm doing something else, yeah. People do it with you know, how much they believe in the teaching. There's often a very strong, I think, a very strong degree of self in skeptical doubt. You know, like it's tied up with an idea of myself or an image of myself that I can't let go of something. You know, I can't free myself when it comes to some aspect of the Dhamma. Whereas ordinary doubt is actually useful and beneficial, because it helps us to sift the chaff from the wheat, you know, to sort of work out, okay, this is something which is very valuable and beneficial, and this isn't. It might be interesting, but it's not of any real great value. So yeah, skeptical doubt, when it becomes a hindrance or an obstacle like that, then of course it becomes dangerous. But ordinary doubt, I think for the most part, people are dealing with ordinary doubt, really, not skeptical doubt. You know.
Yeah, and of course, one of those aspects of doubt as a hindrance is self-doubt. So we get quite a lot where people may not necessarily be questioning the teacher or the teachings, but questioning
themselves. Yeah,
whether they can do it. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes that's the result of what other people have said to them, or done with them, and so on. You know, like especially if they get nothing but negative kind of feedback, you know, and then they start to internalize that, and it becomes, oh, you know, I'm pretty hopeless. I can't do this. I can't do that. And often you find that amongst people who are trying to practice the Dhamma, yeah, where they have a very low self-esteem, a very low view of what they're capable of, which is very, very sad, you know. But it's part of part of what goes on in life with people. And so the people like that, they need to be encouraged and shown the positive and good things that they have and what they're capable of, and to show them in very practical and concrete ways, not to give them lectures. We had in the village where I lived with my teacher in the early days, we had a village madman who lived there. He was completely insane. And he used to run around doing all sorts of crazy things. And he used to quite often come into the monastery and do all sorts of crazy things. And the other monks, if they saw him coming in through the gate, they would try and chase him away. My teacher, if he saw him, would encourage him and bring him up into his kuti, and he'd say to him, "Oh, I'm so pleased that you came to see me today because I need your help. We have to move some furniture." And so they would disassemble a bookshelf, take all the books off it, put them on the floor, take the shelf apart, move the shelf to another part of the room, put all the books back on. And then he'd say to this man, "That's wonderful. You've been so helpful to me today. It's so wonderful that you were generous and kind and, that sort of stuff." And then he'd give the man a cup of tea and off he'd go. He'd be really, really happy and pleased and feel that he'd done something really, really good, And I remember one day I went outside in the back part of the monastery, which had quite a bit of sort of jungly growth in it, and there was the madman up a ladder on a big banana tree with my teacher down the bottom holding the ladder in place, and he was wielding a machete cutting the bananas down, but that was the best thing to do for that person at that time, because it showed him that he had real value, and that he was welcome in the place, not that he was shunned. Now, it doesn't take much to do that, except a great good heart, an open heart to do it, and also not to be afraid of the other person. Anyway, that's just an example that comes to mind.
Individual person sort of thing.
Yeah. Don't know if you heard that, Bhante.
Sorry?
Say that again, David?
That story is all about finding the beauty and the wonderfulness in an individual person.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And recognizing it and sort of acknowledging it, and yeah.
Bhante, I love these stories about your teacher. So for those who don't know, would you be able to share a little bit about who your teacher was? And
he was. I met him really by accident. I had travelled a little bit with Chaokhun Samai in Thailand, and Chaokhun then went back to Australia, and I'd visited quite a few monasteries, and I'd have to be honest and say to you, I was very unimpressed by what I saw, because what I saw was what I thought at the time was a whole lot of lazy people who were just sitting around and getting food from people and doing nothing. Now, that's a bit harsh, but it was certainly borne out in some places. And so I decided I was going to have a holiday. So I asked somebody that I met, "Where's a good place for a holiday?" And they said, "Oh, go to Phuket." In those days, Phuket had only one hotel in the whole place. And so I said, "Oh, okay, how do I do that?" "Oh, you get the bus." So I took the overnight bus and I arrived. I got off the bus and I went into a restaurant which was called Jack and Joy. And I had some lunch, and I asked the man in the restaurant, where could I rent a house? And of course, in Thailand, he said, "I've got a cousin. I've got a cousin who's just got the house for you." So he took me on his motorbike to meet the cousin. I doubt very much that it was a cousin, but anyway. And so I rented this house, and the house came with a housekeeper who did the cooking as well. And so I was having a lovely time. And then I met this man, an older Thai man, on the beach one day. I was doing some drawing. And he said to me, "Oh, are you interested in Buddhism?" He spoke English, thank goodness. And I said, "Oh, yes," And he said, "Oh, you must come and meet this monk." And I said, oh, no, it's okay, because I thought I've had enough of monks. And he said, no, I'll come and get you tomorrow. So he came in the morning and with his motorbike, and I hopped on the motorbike and off we went. It was about 20 Ks on the other side of the island. And we got there and it was very, very hot. It was the hot season. And we sat on the steps overlooking the courtyard, waiting for the monks to come out of the dining hall. And they came out and he said, oh, he's not there. He must be out at a dana or something. So he said, I'll take you back to the house. So he did. And when we got back, he said, now don't worry, because I'll come back tomorrow and take you. And I said, no, don't come back tomorrow. It's okay. So, of course, what I was to later learn was that time means nothing in Thailand. If they tell you 9 o'clock, they could be there at 7 or they could be there at 11. It wouldn't matter. So I actually planned to get up and leave the house early so that when he arrived, I wouldn't be there. And of course, he arrived early. So we went back to the monastery and the monk was there that he wanted me to meet. And I met him and I was immediately so impressed by him. But what I was impressed by was his extraordinary ordinariness. Yeah, I didn't know he was the abbot at the time, but he just said, oh, I have a seat here and would you like a cup of tea? He spoke English, which was very fortunate for me because at that time I didn't have any Thai. And we just talked. And at the end of that time, I found myself saying to him, can I come and see you again? Yeah, of course, he said, So after a few days, I went back again. I went on the local truck bus. And then I began going back every second day, and then it became every day in the afternoon to see him and spend time with him. And then finally, I asked him, could I come and stay at the monastery? And he said, yes. And then when a few days later, when I said, oh, so when can I come? He said, no, you can't. It's too difficult. It's no one else speaks English and you don't speak Thai. So it would be too hard. And the only way you could do it would be if you became a monk. And I thought, well, I'm not doing that. So I went back to the beach. And then a couple of days later, I thought, oh, well, it doesn't matter because you can disrobe any time in this tradition. So I went back and I said to him, okay, yeah, I will. And he said, no, you won't. So we had this backwards and forwards game for quite a while. And then he gave me a number of things that he said I had to do. And it turned out that none of them were true. And one of them was I had to go to the governor of the province and ask his permission. So Kun Chert, who was the older Thai man that I'd met, he took me along to meet the governor, who had no English at all. And he explained to the governor why I was there. And the look on the governor's face was just incredible. And he said to Kun Chert, yeah, tell him, yeah, it's good. Well, good idea, So we went back and after a couple of weeks, my teacher finally said, no, it won't work. It's not going to work. So I went back to the beach house very, very cross and very angry because I'd wasted so much time. And then I thought, well, it doesn't matter. It makes no difference at all. If I can keep going and seeing him each day, then that's good enough. So I went back on the Friday and he said to me as I was leaving on Friday, come on Monday. So that was the start. And the way that he taught, he never ever gave formal teaching. It was always informal. Even when he was giving Dharma talks in the hall to the lay community or to the other monks, they were never formal. They were always very informal and very direct and down to earth. And that's how he taught. And then while I was living there, my sister and some friends came over from time to time and they would stay. And my sister said to me, oh, he's just so lovely. So she used to bring him the most bizarre presents. So she brought him at Christmas time once, she brought him a gingerbread house from the Erawan Hotel in Bangkok. And he thought it was just marvelous. So he put it on the shrine and said, well, now we'll have Buddha Mass instead of Christmas. Yeah, he was the most extraordinary human being. He was just incredible. And my greatest sadness is that he was too old and too frail to travel to Australia. So yeah, most wonderful person. And he treated every person he met exactly the same. Didn't matter who it was, whether it was the village madman or the richest man in the province, who we met as well. No one was treated differently. Every single person got the same treatment. And that, to me, was one of the greatest lessons that he ever taught. Because compared to how some other monks were, I spoke at his funeral, and a very good Thai friend of mine, Sue Park, said to me, "Oh, why did you say that he was better than any other monk that you'd ever met?" She said, "Because the other monks would have been really annoyed by the fact that you said that." And I said, "Because it was true." So yeah, he was most extraordinary person. So he was 90, I think it was 92 when he finally died. Yeah, most wonderful person. And he had amazing insight into people. You know, there was a very famous filmmaker who was making, some of you might remember a film called Casualties of War, which was about the Vietnam War, but it was filmed in Thailand, just as the other famous film about Cambodia was filmed in Thailand too, The Killing Fields. They were both filmed quite close to the monastery. And the directors wanted the monks to be involved in the film, and my teacher said no, they're not to be involved in the film at all. And anyway, this director, a young fellow, used to come and visit me at the what, and he said, "Oh, the director wants to come and meet your teacher." And this young fellow had told me all sorts of stories about this director, which sounded like he was the most horrible person. And I said, "Oh, I don't know whether that's possible." And then one day the director just turned up at the monastery, and I was sitting with my teacher in his kuti, and this man came up the stairs and in through the door, and his opening words to my teacher were, "Oh, Lung Po, I'm a very bad man. I've done very many bad things, and my problem is I love women too much." And my teacher, without batting an eyelid, said to him, "You're not a very bad man, but you've done a lot of very bad things, and your problem is not that you love women too much, but yourself." And then he said, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And they then sat down and talked for hours. So yes, so that's what he was like. He just had this astonishing capacity to see into the heart of people, you know. But he was never harsh, never judgmental, never critical, you know, unless in the monastery he saw someone behaving badly towards somebody else, and then he would speak to them, but otherwise, no. Anyway, so that's, yeah. So there you are. Sorry, I've taken up all the time now with the story. So anyway.
No, it was great. It was like not just thoroughly entertaining, but just so inspiring to know that these people existed. And
they're hard to find though, boy.
Yeah.
Really hard to find, sadly. But anyway, you have to become them, you know. Yeah. Anyway, so
we do have some questions, if it's okay. So
make them quick. I can't really sit for much longer.
Okay. One last question then. Is living between faith, doubt, like a battle with living between the mind and the heart? Example, what the heart believes in or what the mind wants?
Well, no, I think that's hardening the edges of the two things too much, I think. Because sometimes what the heart wants is the right thing, isn't it? Sometimes what the mind wants is the right thing, but also sometimes it can be the reverse. You know, there's you know, there are plenty of occasions where you think, oh, you know, what I really want is such and such, whatever it is, and then it turns out, well, not really, you know, or I want it for all the wrong reasons. And sometimes I can have, you know, the idea that, oh, you know, in my mind, this is how things should be, and then it turns out that that's not how they should be. So it's tricky, I think, to start putting really hard edges on these things, you know, but rather to see them as things that are in flux all the time, and that we, in a strange way, I think we need to make our way between them, so that it's like the middle path, isn't it? So we don't get caught in either of them in those early stages, so that we maintain that that kind of personal integrity and a personal freedom. That's not to say that we don't listen, because we must listen, but we have to be responsible. There's a very wonderful, pardon me, there's a wonderful text that comes from the Renaissance, from a French philosopher called Etienne Le Boétie, and it's called, in English it's translated as on voluntary servitude, and he writes, the very beginning of this text says, why is it that human beings constantly want to hand over their freedom, their independence to somebody else, and want that person to tell them, okay, do this, do that, do something else? Yeah. And he says, this doesn't make any sense. What is it that people are afraid of? They lack courage to be responsible for themselves, And look, I'll tell you one last very funny story. I was giving a retreat once at Wat Buddha Dhamma, a 10-day retreat, and somebody came to me during the interview and they said, this is hopeless. This is a hopeless retreat. And I said, oh, okay. And they said, because you don't tell people what they should do. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, you keep telling people they can come to meditation or not come to meditation. They can come to this or not come to that, And I said, well, yes, And he said, well, that's not, people are not here for you to say that to them. They're here so that you can say to them, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to do something else. And I said to this person, okay, all right, right. And I said, well, now listen very, very carefully, because I'm going to tell you what to do. And this person said, yes, I said, okay, from this point forward, you have to be 100% responsible for yourself. You have to decide for yourself what you're going to do, whether you will come to meditation or not. And they said, oh, you're talking crap. But later I came across them crying in the bush. So something got through to them. But yeah, it's that whole thing of, I want someone else to tell me what to do. And the problem with that is, of course, when it goes wrong, you then blame the other person. It's like, oh, no, you told me to do that, Yeah. So anyway, so can I do a little blessing and we'll finish?
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Bhante. Thank you so much.
Thank you to all of you, and thank you for taking part, and Tina for arranging it all. Yattha varivaha pura paripurenti sagarang he wang me wangi todinang petanang upakapati chitang paditang tunghang kipamewa samijatu sabe purentu sankapa chantopanarasoyata mani jatirasoyata Sapitio haviva chanto saparoko vena satuma deva vantarayo sukiti kayuko bhava abhiva dhanasili sanichang utang pachayino taro tamma vatanti ayuvano sukang Balang bhavatu sapa mangalang rakantu saba devata saba bhuta nupahvena sada sohti bhavantu te bhavatu sapa mangalang rakantu saba devata saba dhamma nubhavena sada sohti bhavantu te bhavatu sapa mangalang rakantu saba devata saba sankanu Bhavena sada soti bhavantu te.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good sleep, good dreams.
Thank you so much,
Bhante.
Bye-bye. Take care.
On behalf of everyone at the Mental Centre.
Sorry?
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Okay.
Bhante, just wish you many blessings, good health, and long life.
Thank
you.
Okay. Bye.